The scent of lilies and unspoken family tensions filled St. Mary's Cathedral as we gathered to say goodbye to Thomas Mitchell, patriarch of Mitchell Industries and the man who had shaped all of our lives in ways we were only beginning to understand. I sat in the front pew between my mother and my brother Daniel, listening to the priest deliver a eulogy that painted my father as a visionary businessman and devoted family man. All true but incomplete. What the priest didn't mention was Dad's ability to see potential where others saw failure, or his tendency to test people in ways they never realized until much later. My name is Jessica Mitchell, and at 29, I'm the family disappointment. While my older brother Daniel built a successful medical practice and my sister Lauren married into old money and social prominence, I chose a different path. One that led me away from the family's expectations and into what they considered a frivolous career in event planning. "Such a beautiful service," whispered my Aunt Margaret as the final hymn concluded. Thomas would have been so proud of Daniel and Lauren. "And Jessica," she added as an afterthought, "at least you tried, dear." That phrase had followed me for years. At least you tried. It was the family's way of acknowledging my efforts while simultaneously dismissing them. At least you tried to build a business. At least you tried to be independent. At least you tried to prove yourself worthy of the Mitchell name. As we filed out of the cathedral, Daniel fell into step beside me. At 33, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. His medical practice was thriving, his house was featured in Architectural Digest, and his wife came from the kind of family that had buildings named after them. "It's okay, Jessica," he said, putting his arm around my shoulders in a gesture that was both protective and patronizing. "Not everyone can be successful like us." Dad understood that. Lauren, walking ahead of us in her black Chanel suit, turned back with a sympathetic smile. "Daniel's right. You tried your best with that little event business. Dad was proud of you for trying." My little event business. That's what they called Mitchell Strategic Events, the company I'd built from nothing into something they couldn't quite understand or categorize. Because it didn't fit their definition of success. It wasn't medicine or law or marrying well. They'd never bothered to learn what it actually was. "The reading of the will is scheduled for tomorrow morning," my mother said as we reached the limousines. "Mr. Henderson wants all family members present at 10 o'clock sharp." James Henderson had been our family lawyer for 30 years, handling everything from business contracts to divorce settlements. He'd watched all of us grow up, had seen every family triumph and crisis. If anyone understood the complexities of Mitchell family dynamics, it was him. That evening we gathered at the family estate for the traditional post-funeral dinner. The dining room, where we'd shared countless Sunday meals, felt smaller somehow without Dad's commanding presence at the head of the table. "I spoke with the board this afternoon," Daniel said, carving the roast with the same precision he brought to surgery. "They're prepared to transition leadership to me as planned. Mitchell Industries will be in good hands." Lauren nodded approvingly. Thomas always said the business needed a steady hand. Someone with proven success. They spoke about Dad in past tense, about the company as if its future had already been decided. I pushed food around my plate and thought about the late-night conversations I'd had with Dad over the past few years, the ones where he'd asked detailed questions about my business, my clients, my vision for the future. "Jessica," Mom said, pulling me from my thoughts. "You'll need to decide what you want to do now. With your father gone, perhaps it's time to consider more stable options." "More stable than what?" "Than event planning, dear. It's such an uncertain field. Daniel's right that not everyone can be a doctor, but surely there's something more reliable you could pursue." I could have told them about the Fortune 500 companies that contracted my services, about the government agencies that relied on my strategic planning expertise, about the international summits I'd organized. But I'd learned years ago that explanations fell on deaf ears. "We'll see what tomorrow brings," I said simply. The next morning we gathered in Mr. Henderson's office, a wood-paneled sanctuary filled with law books and the weight of family history. He sat behind his massive desk, Dad's will spread before him like a roadmap to our future. "Before we begin," Mr. Henderson said, adjusting his glasses, "I want you to know that your father spent considerable time crafting this document. Every decision was deliberate and carefully considered." Daniel shifted in his chair, already mentally preparing to assume control of the family empire. Lauren sat perfectly composed, her designer handbag positioned just so. Mom had her hands folded in her lap, the picture of grieving dignity. The will contains several specific bequests, Mr. Henderson continued, but the primary concern is the disposition of Mitchell Industries and the associated assets. He cleared his throat and began reading in his formal lawyer's voice. I, Thomas Mitchell, being of sound mind and body, do hereby distribute my earthly possessions as follows. The smaller bequests came first. Charitable donations, gifts to longtime employees, provisions for my mother's continued comfort. All expected, all reasonable. Then came the moment we'd all been waiting for. As for Mitchell Industries, including all subsidiaries, properties, investments, and associated assets. Mr. Henderson paused, looking directly at each of us. Everything, the business, properties, investments, goes to the daughter who proved herself capable of building something from nothing, who understood that true success cannot be inherited but must be earned. The room went completely silent. Daniel's confident smile froze on his face. Lauren's composure cracked slightly. Mom's hands tightened in her lap. The entire estate, Mr. Henderson continued, including controlling interest in Mitchell Industries, goes to Jessica Marie Mitchell. Their faces turned white as the words sank in. Daniel's mouth opened and closed without sound. Lauren's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide her shock. Mom looked like she might faint. That's impossible, Daniel finally managed. Dad always said the business would come to me. I'm the oldest. I'm the doctor. You're the son, Mr. Henderson interrupted gently. But your father was very specific about his reasoning. He pulled out a sealed envelope. Thomas left individual letters for each of you, but he also included a statement explaining his decision. Would you like me to read it? Yes, I said quietly while the others sat in stunned silence. Mr. Henderson unfolded a document in Dad's familiar handwriting and began to read. To my family who I love deeply but who have never truly seen each other clearly. Jessica has spent the last 8 years building Mitchell Strategic Events into the premier strategic planning firm on the East Coast. While you dismissed her work as party planning, she was actually coordinating international diplomatic summits, managing crisis communications for Fortune 500 companies, and orchestrating complex logistics operations that required the skills of a military strategist. Daniel's face had gone from white to red. Party planning? Jessica plans parties. Mr. Henderson continued reading. Jessica's client list includes the State Department, the United Nations, Google, Apple, and the Federal Reserve. She has managed events for heads of state, Nobel Prize ceremonies, and corporate mergers worth billions of dollars. Her company's annual revenue exceeds that of my medical practice by 300%. Lauren's handbag slipped from her lap. That's not possible. She drives a normal car. She lives in a normal apartment. She doesn't even wear designer clothes. Jessica chose to live modestly while building her business, Dad's letter continued. She understands that true wealth lies in capability, not possessions. She has proven herself able to handle complex operations, manage large teams, and make decisions under pressure. All skills essential for running Mitchell Industries. Mom found her voice. But she never told us any of this. Mr. Henderson reached for another document. Actually, she tried many times. Your father documented several occasions when Jessica attempted to share details about her work, only to have the conversation redirected to Daniel's medical practice or Lauren's social activities. He handed me a folder I'd never seen before. Jessica, your father kept copies of all the articles written about your company. Forbes featured you last year as one of 30 under 30 in the events industry. The Wall Street Journal called your crisis management work indispensable to corporate America. The Washington Post described your diplomatic event coordination as setting new standards for international relations. I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were dozens of articles, photos from high-profile events I'd organized, copies of contracts with companies and organizations I'd never told my family about. Dad had been following my career more closely than I'd ever realized. There's more, Mr. Henderson said. Jessica, your father included a private letter for you as well. He handed me an envelope with my name written in Dad's careful script. My hands shook as I opened it. My dearest Jessica, if you're reading this, then my family has finally learned what I've known for years, that you are the most capable and accomplished of my children. I watched you build Mitchell Strategic Events from a single client to a multi-million-dollar operation. I watched you handle crises that would have destroyed seasoned executives. I watched you coordinate events that shaped international policy and corporate strategy. Most importantly, I watched you do all of this while your family dismissed your achievements because they didn't understand them. Daniel is an excellent surgeon, but he's never managed anything larger than a medical practice. Lauren has social connections, but she's never built anything of her own. You have proven yourself capable of running complex operations, managing teams of hundreds, and making decisions that affect millions of people. Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading. Mitchell Industries needs someone who understands strategy, logistics, and leadership under pressure. Someone who can see the big picture while managing countless details. Someone who has proven herself in the real world, not just inherited a position. You're that person. You've always been that person. Now it's time for everyone else to see it too. I looked up to find my family staring at me with completely new eyes. Jessica, Daniel said slowly, you organized the G20 summit? I nodded. 3 years ago. Along with the subsequent trade negotiations. The Nobel Prize ceremony? Lauren asked faintly. Last year and this year. Plus the accompanying International Science Symposium. The Apple product launch that was featured on every news channel? Mom whispered. That was just one project. We also handled their crisis communications during the privacy lawsuit. Mr. Henderson was reading from another document. According to your father's research, Mitchell Strategic Events coordinated the logistics for the peace talks between 3 African nations last year. The ones that ended a 20-year conflict. You ended a war? Daniel's voice cracked. I coordinated the logistics for the peace talks, I corrected. The diplomats ended the war. I just made sure they had the right environment to do it. Lauren was scrolling frantically through her phone. Jessica, there are photos of you with the Secretary of State. With the Prime Minister of Canada. Is that the Pope? Vatican Summit on Climate Change, I confirmed. Beautiful venue, challenging security requirements. Why didn't you tell us? Mom asked. I thought about all the Sunday dinners where I'd tried to share my excitement about breakthrough projects, only to have Daniel change the subject to his latest surgery or Lauren redirect to her charity gala planning. I tried, I said simply. But every time I mentioned my work, you assumed it was small-scale party planning. When I said I was coordinating international events, you heard wedding planning. When I mentioned working with government agencies, you heard corporate retreats. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. There's one more thing. Thomas included specific instructions for the transition of Mitchell Industries. He pulled out a detailed business plan. Your father had been preparing for this transition for 2 years. He converted many of the company's operations to align with Jessica's expertise in strategic planning and crisis management. What does that mean? Daniel asked. It means Mitchell Industries is no longer just a traditional manufacturing company, I said, reading through Dad's notes. He's been transitioning us into strategic consulting and crisis management for other businesses. He restructured the entire company around your skill set, Mr. Henderson confirmed. Mitchell Industries now specializes in helping other companies navigate complex challenges, coordinate large-scale operations, and manage crisis situations. Lauren was still staring at her phone. Jessica, the UN website lists you as their primary strategic events coordinator for the past 4 years. That's correct. You've been working for the United Nations for 4 years and never mentioned it? I mentioned it several times. You always changed the subject. Daniel had gone very quiet. Finally he spoke. Jessica, I owe you an apology. We all do. We've been incredibly unfair. You've been viewing success through a very narrow lens, I agreed. But Dad understood that real success isn't about prestige or social status. It's about capability and impact. What happens now? Mom asked. I looked around the room at my family, people who'd known me my entire life but had never really seen me until this moment. Now we work together, I said. Daniel, your medical expertise could be valuable for our healthcare industry clients. Lauren, your social connections could help us expand into new markets. We can build something bigger than what any of us could achieve alone. You'd want us to work with you? Lauren asked. After how we've treated you? Family is complicated, I said, echoing something Dad used to say. But it's still family. Mr. Henderson gathered his papers. Jessica, there's one final item. Your father included instructions for a celebration dinner tonight. He specifically requested that it be planned by the most capable event coordinator I know, meaning you. I smiled, thinking about Dad's sense of humor. He always did like to test people. What kind of test? Daniel asked. He wanted to see if I could plan a family dinner that would bring us together instead of driving us apart. Apparently, that's more challenging than coordinating international summits. As we left Mr. Henderson's office, I felt the weight of Dad's expectations settling on my shoulders. Not just the responsibility of running Mitchell Industries, but the challenge of rebuilding relationships with family members who were finally seeing me clearly for the first time. That evening, I coordinated what might have been my most important event yet. A family dinner where we actually talked to each other instead of talking past each other. Daniel asked detailed questions about my work with the State Department. Lauren wanted to understand how crisis management worked. Mom apologized for years of dismissing my achievements. Jessica, Daniel said as we cleared the dishes, I have to ask, did you really coordinate the logistics for ending a war? I coordinated the logistics for peace talks that led to a ceasefire agreement, I clarified. The actual peacemaking was done by much more important people than me. But you made it possible, Lauren said. Without proper logistics, the talks never would have happened. That's what I do, I said. I make complex things possible by managing all the details that other people don't have time to think about. Over the following weeks, as I transitioned into running Mitchell Industries, my family slowly began to understand the scope of what I'd been building. Daniel joined the company as our healthcare consulting director. Lauren became our corporate relations manager. Mom started volunteering with our nonprofit division. The most surprising discovery came when I reviewed Dad's files and found years of notes about my career. He'd been tracking my progress more closely than I'd ever imagined, collecting articles about my work, keeping copies of testimonials from clients, documenting every achievement my family had overlooked. In his final note to me, he'd written, Jessica, you've spent years proving yourself to people who weren't paying attention. Now you can focus on proving yourself to people who matter, your clients, your employees, and most importantly, yourself. 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of our expanded offices, presenting Mitchell Industries' new strategic direction to our board of directors. The same people who'd planned to hand control to Daniel were now listening intently as I outlined our transformation from traditional manufacturing to strategic consulting. Our Q3 results show a 40% increase in revenue, I reported. We've signed contracts with 6 new Fortune 500 companies and 3 government agencies. The transition to strategic consulting has exceeded all projections. After the meeting, I walked to Dad's old office, now my office, and sat in the chair he'd occupied for 30 years. On the desk was the framed photo from that family dinner, the first one where we'd actually seen each other clearly. My phone buzzed with a message from the State Department. Jessica, we need your team to coordinate the logistics for emergency peace talks in Eastern Europe. Can you have a preliminary plan ready by tomorrow morning? I smiled, thinking about Dad's final test. He'd wanted to know if I could plan a family dinner that brought people together. Turns out, bringing people together, whether it's family members or world leaders, requires the same basic skills. Listening carefully, understanding what everyone needs, and creating an environment where real communication can happen. The difference is that world leaders are often easier to work with than family members. They usually want the same thing and are willing to negotiate in good faith. Family requires much more sophisticated diplomacy. As I started working on the preliminary peace talk logistics, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. Years of building a business while my family watched without seeing, years of proving myself to people who weren't paying attention, years of waiting for recognition that came only after Dad was gone to give it. But in the end, the recognition wasn't what mattered. The work was what mattered. The problems solved, the conflicts resolved. The complex operations made simple through careful planning and strategic thinking. Dad had understood that all along. He'd known that true success can't be inherited or given. It has to be earned through consistent excellence, one project at a time. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Mitchell Industries, this is Jessica. Ms. Mitchell? This is the Secretary General's office at the United Nations. We have a situation developing that requires immediate strategic coordination. Are you available for an emergency consultation? I looked at the photo on my desk, at my family finally seeing each other clearly, then opened my laptop to begin another complex logistical challenge. Always available, I said. What kind of situation are we looking at? Because that's what success actually looks like. Not the moment when people finally recognize what you've built, but all the moments when you're building it one careful decision at a time. Just like Dad always knew it would be.